Today, on the new Design for Living, we are going to talk about earthquakes. I'm really excited because in just a few minutes, we're going to chat with Austin Holland, and he is with the Alaska Earthquake Center at the University of Fairbanks. We chatted briefly just a few minutes ago, and I was just like, you got to save all of that for the show because it was a little bit mind-blowing to me. So I'm excited to learn more about earthquake preparedness, to try to understand a little bit more about why we have so many earthquakes, because like the one on the 27th, which happened at 8:11 a.m., I mean, that was a roller for sure. Now, my bedroom is underground, so to speak, right? I'm below the earth. And so it's weird for me because I actually hear the earthquake before I feel it. And it sounds like, it's almost like plastic cracking. So I hear it, and then I feel this very low murmur rumble. And then, of course, the violence kicks in. So it's a really weird thing to be underground, so to speak, and hear it and feel it from that perspective than perhaps upstairs or in your car when you maybe aren't that quite connected to the underground. But wow, 37 miles outside of Anchorage, 6.0. You know, I was not here for the big one that happened a few years ago now, but this one was definitely a reminder of two things. Number one, I really don't know what I'm doing. I really don't, you know, and this idea of the go bag seems like a smart thing to do. And so we're going to chat with Austin Holland here. He's going to give us a call and be a part of the show today because it's kind of interesting. This center has been around since 1987, and they measure, you know, more than just earthquakes. And I'm looking forward to chatting with Austin about that, as well as this idea of, can you predict earthquakes? Is there something in these, you know, instruments that they use that can predict an earthquake? I mean, I think it was this year when they said it was imminent. Could have been last year. It's all a blur now. You know, that the volcano was going to blow. And they used the word imminent, you know, and that word is very specific. It's going to happen. So I'm out and about grabbing air filters and all sorts of things to prepare for that eruption, which we did not have. But it'll be curious to hear what Austin has to share with us and how he can educate us specifically about the relationship also between earthquakes and not just tsunamis, but also volcanoes and their eruptions. Now, that's clearly happening in some key places all over the world. And I'm just excited to be better educated because when that shook the other morning, I was up like probably you were, and I was heading for the door. And then I thought, oh, but, you know, clothing, jacket, hat, gloves, like things that, because I'm not getting under any table. I think that was just a generation that didn't know what the hell they were talking about. And they said, you know what, let's just put the kids under the desks. Why would you want to go underneath something? And I'll ask Austin about that. Why would you want to go underneath something that could crush you? Just, you know, I'm pretty sure they just didn't know what they were talking about. I'm all for the door frame or just running outside, possibly, you know, getting into the car. But yeah, it just really made me realize I need more information. I need to be better prepared. Maybe you do too. And the guys at the Alaska Earthquake Center up in Fairbanks were very, very gracious. I reached out to them on Facebook. They gave me an email. I reached out via email. We had some good conversations this morning. And Austin will be my guest in just a few minutes. A couple of things to remind you. This show, The New Design for Living, is available as a podcast on Apple Podcasts, and the podcast lives at podbean.com. So you can always catch up with anything you miss by going to those two sites. Hello, is this Austin Holland?
This is.
Well, fantastic, Austin. Thank you so much for being a part of the New Design for Living today. I really appreciate your availability. I would imagine you guys are pretty popular these days.
We stay busy.
So let's talk a little bit about the center before we get into all this other great information. It was established in 1987, and What is it that what is it that you do? Because you do more than just monitor earthquakes. Tell us more about the center.
Yeah, so the Alaska Earthquake Center is really a multi-mission sort of scientific center. We've worked in tsunamis, doing tsunami modeling and working with communities to establish tsunami hazards and evacuation routes for communities within coastal Alaska. Mm-hmm. We monitor earthquakes, but we also then use those instruments to monitor and detect landslides that are occurring, as well as monitoring things like glacial quakes and other types of activities that are natural, sometimes maybe not even natural events that make noise that can be carried through the earth. We also then operate weather stations at some of our sites because they're operated in remote areas where maybe weather data isn't as available. Mm-hmm. So we try to collect a wide variety of different scientific measurements that can benefit Alaska's public.
And these instruments, can you describe one or two for us so I have an idea of what you're actually using to measure this seismic activity?
Yeah, so a seismic monitoring instrument looks like maybe a small trash can, big beer can, mm-hmm. and it has cables coming out of it that then go to a small specialized computer. And so that little can, some of them are super sensitive, and you could not walk by one of these sensors within 100 feet without us being able to see it. It is, no matter how quiet you walked, we would easily be able to see you. We can see animals walking past our stations. That's not generally what we're looking for. Mm-hmm. And so then those computers then take the information, package it up, and send it over satellite, cell phone, radio link, whatever communication systems might be available to us in that location.
How many of these instruments do you have in Alaska?
So we're operating more than 250 stations at the moment. There are many researchers operating research-type projects that aren't communicating necessarily with our stations, but then there's other institutions like the Alaska Volcano Observatory, the Tsunami Warning Center, and the U.S. Geological Survey that also have instruments within Alaska. So it's a very significant number of different monitoring systems. The Alaska Volcano Observatory, they're monitoring specifically for activity around volcanoes and not utilizing that data for the whole state. So we incorporate their information into our network as well.
And how do you know where to place these 200-plus instruments? What are you using to put them in places where activity is more likely than not?
Oh, I'd love to be able to tell you it was science that put these where these are. There are a lot of factors that go into where these stations are located. The largest factor is probably historical events. Mm-hmm. And so we've adopted a number of stations from, say, the U.S. Geological Survey back in, I believe it was when we first started as Alaska Earthquake Center, that are tightly spaced around the Bering Glacier. Most recently, we adopted a very large number of stations throughout Alaska, which has really helped our data coverage from a large National Science Foundation project that was ending. And so we adopted the stations and kept them going. So that's a large part of our network now is this set of stations that were placed out on a grid. The problem with that is, on a grid, you can imagine it's really hard to get to some of these locations. Right. And then some of our stations are just placed where you can feasibly get to them. So it's kind of evolved over generations.
That's absolutely fascinating. And what I was just saying before you called in was that on the 27th, when we had that earthquake, because my bedroom is underground, I can hear it. Like it sounds like plastic snapping, at least this last one did. So I hear it first, then I can feel a very low vibe tremor, so to speak, before the fullness of the quake hits. Is that my way of tapping into seismic activity? Because when I'm upstairs, I don't hear it, let alone feel what comes before the big shake, but I do when I'm quote unquote downstairs.
Yeah, and that actually speaks to a number of different things. Certainly where you're situated in a house and the type of structure and where you are in that structure and the type of ground you're on, all that can impact how people experience earthquakes. So the experience you have where you can hear it and kind of feel it, and then the strong shaking starts, generally what happens is that's the P wave arriving first. So P wave is called the primary wave. It's the wave that travels faster in the earth, and it travels kind of like a sound wave. So when it interacts with objects within the earth or on top of the earth, it's interacting in the same motion that a sound wave does. So it transfers or gets transformed into sound energy fairly easily, whereas the S waves are these much slower and larger amplitude waves, interact then differently and generate a lot of the shaking. And then after that come the surface waves, which are even the largest shaking.
You know, this is very fascinating to me as a broadcaster and someone who's very obsessed with sound waves, that the Earth would be emitting. I mean, it's really not a surprise. There's so much information out these days about the Earth, right? There's no shortage of information about what's happening. But it's really kind of beautiful that the Earth is speaking in a way in that audio wave that you just described. And it certainly confirms why I hear the earthquake before the rest kicks in.
Absolutely.
I mean, would this be something you've done any studies on yourself to do a deeper dive into the audio wave of the planet, of the Earth?
There are other researchers out there who have accelerated the frequency or the playback speed of the noise of the Earth.
Okay.
And it is absolutely fascinating to listen to the Earth pop and crack. And so this is a big part of what seismology is we're using the principles of sound waves.
Wow.
And so it is absolutely an amazing listen. I can look to see if I can find that link, but just to hear the Earth kind of pop and crack through time, it's remarkable.
It is remarkable because what it also helps us remember is, it's alive. It is a live organism, right? It's just this thing every once in a while that earthquakes cause me to remember the Earth is shifting. Like she is also going through her changes as well. We're talking with Austin Holland. He is with the Alaska Earthquake Center at the University of Fairbanks. And unfortunately, I can't chat with Austin and take your calls, but hopefully I'll be covering as many questions as you might have yourself. So I was doing a little research to get myself educated, and I'm going to ask you to help fill in the blanks because I want to understand what makes Alaska so unique. Like we've got the Pacific Plate, these two tectonic plates, the Pacific Plate that apparently pushes its way into the North American Plate. So can you share a little bit about what's going on with these plates and how it sets Alaska up to be so prone for these earthquakes?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, the Pacific Plate is crashing into the North American Plate. Along the southeast, they're actually sliding past each other. So in southeast Alaska and western Canada, the two plates are kind of sliding past each other in a side-by-side motion, sort of like the San Andreas Fault in California. And then the Pacific Plate underneath the Aleutians is subducting really quick and steep and creating the Aleutian Islands and the volcanoes. And then in sort of the Cook Inlet, south central part of Alaska, that subduction zone is shallow and it's really pushing and grinding against the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate, which is, creating the Alaska Range and the high mountains and Denali, just an amazing amount of force. And if you look at like seismicity maps, you can see on our website, you see the seismicity sort of trend, the majority of a trend along the Aleutians, and then up into central Alaska, kind of following the arc of that subduction zone.
And how do you monitor the movement of these plates? How is that being observed or measured?
GPS, just like you have in your car.
Okay.
Okay, it's a little fancier than the
but I like
GPS
that.
in your
helps.
car.
That helps.
So just like you can use GPS to tell you where you are and how to get somewhere, we can use high accuracy GPS attached to the Earth to measure how fast these plates are coming together and how they're interacting. And part of the reason that we're so active here in Alaska is that the relative motion of these two plates is really quite high, and so it's driving very rapid deformation.
Okay, so now is this new? Is this acceleration new, or has this been the way of these plates for a while?
So since we've been able to measure them, it's been that way for a long time, and sort of the going back in the recent geologic past that they've been, it's been a very active plate boundary, and so that's what leads to the very common occurrence of large earthquakes.
Mm-hmm. And what causes a plate to have the pressure or to move? What's causing the movement of the plate versus they're just stationary?
There's a fair amount of debate still on some of what drives this, because we can't see inside the Earth. We have to use seismic waves that we measure from earthquakes and other sources to try and figure out what all is going on. Mm-hmm. But some of it is, as hot magma rises in the center of the oceans at spreading centers, that then pushes the plate somewhere else. And so we create these convection cells, sort of like when you're boiling water in a pan, you can see the hotter water rise to the surface and the colder water push over to the side and sink down. So we get these convection cells that are obviously much slower than water, because we're talking about molten rock, think of lava, and it's deep within the earth. There's a lot of pressure. Things are really quite slow. But you get these convection cells that help drive these plates to have this plate motion.
And so how many earthquakes does Alaska really have on a yearly basis?
This is a great question. There's always this challenge around what are you measuring. So, I mean, if we're going to go down to magnitude 0 and greater earthquakes, it would be some astronomical number that I don't have an answer to. But the Alaska Earthquake Center reports between 30 and 50,000 earthquakes a year. So this means
hold on a second. 30 to 50,000 a year?
That's correct.
At what starting point? One, two, three? Like this one was 6. So what are you starting with that makes it go as high as 50,000 a year?
Yeah, so that's going down to about a magnitude 1.5 or 2. Wow. So these are smaller earthquakes, not being felt, but they tell us something about the larger earthquakes and where we might expect them in the future as well. So there is some value to go down to 1.5. And we detect earthquakes that are much smaller than that. The challenge is we can only spend our time looking at so many earthquakes. And so we have to have some cutoffs for ourselves.
And so this year, 2025, you're on track to have between 30 and 50,000 earthquakes in the state?
So we have been having a challenge since the Sandpoint earthquake earlier this summer in July, and we lost one of our analysts, unfortunately passed away. So we're a little behind on our analysis, and we haven't gotten through that whole sequence. But yeah, we're sort of in the sort of normal sort of fluctuation, and at a pace for sort of that normal level of seismic activity.
I mean, I can see why this can be an obsession and why maybe you love this job, because this is very, very fascinating. It's got a nice layer of mystery to it as well, and unpredictability, even though you've got all these instruments communicating all this information back to you. I think it's really fascinating how, aside from the fact that, 30 to 50,000, that's just an interesting thing to adjust to mentally. But it's interesting that they point you somewhere, that they can show you enough of something that can maybe help you, because you and I briefly talked about the question of can you predict an earthquake? So is this how you could, because of the 30,000+ that we get that can point you towards an area of heightened activity?
We absolutely can use the earthquakes of the past to do a few things. One is we can use them to tell us something about what the overall hazard is in the area. So the USGS, we contribute to this effort. The U.S. Geological Survey has a map that shows the seismic hazard, the likelihood of a damaging event in the next 100 years. It's an amazing map that I encourage people to go look at. We have a link to it on our website as well. That is it shows just how active Alaska is. And we can use those little earthquakes and our big earthquakes. We can use all that to create this forecast for how likely is a damaging earthquake in different communities.
It's just so interesting. I'm also just thinking about volcanoes, right? So now my question is, what is the relationship between earthquakes and volcanoes? Can one cause the other?
So there is clearly, since they're both inside the earth, there are interactions between these. And so there are a handful of cases where someone can demonstrate that volcano activity was, I would say, accelerated due to an earthquake. And certainly any volcanic eruption contains tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of earthquakes as those processes unfold within a volcano. So there's clearly a tight link between the two. And so we can actually use, earthquakes to tell us about, and in some places, some volcanoes are particularly susceptible. Like you can actually look at the pattern of earthquakes and know quite precisely when the eruption might occur. So places where the geology is a little more simple, like Iceland, that's much more of a possibility. But we can actually use some of this information from the earthquakes to tell us about volcano hazards.
That is so fascinating. So where are the current hotspots in Alaska when you think about the likelihood of a bigger quake?
The Aleutians stand out as our largest earthquake generator. So over the last 125 years, the 15 of the 16 largest earthquakes in the United States have been here in Alaska.
Whoa. And
the vast majority of them have been along the Aleutians. And of course, we have the Anchorage earthquake and in 64, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I just moved to Alaska. I'm still learning.
You did? Where did you come from? Where'd you come up from?
I moved here from New Mexico.
And were you doing this work there?
So I've done this work in New Mexico, yes, in New Mexico and Oklahoma and Idaho, yeah.
Well, let me chat with you just for a second about you, because I was going to ask anyway, was this one of those fascinations even when you were younger? I mean, how did you find your path into the world of earthquakes?
So I love nature and I love computers. And this is putting the two together. I love being outside and backpacking and just, being out in nature. And I love computers. And it turns out seismology is really a mix of being outside, and you have instruments all over the place, and there are even computers out there in the field. So,
wow.
And it's very definitely computer-based here in the office.
And are there conferences where people like you come together and just shop like this, like they would in any other industry?
Yeah, so it's actually a fairly small community. I've been participating in those conferences for, I hate to, give my age away, but over 30 years. The community's obviously grown as time has gone on, but it's called the Seismological Society of America, is one of the really renowned seismology conferences that occurs every year. And it used to be, a few hundred seismologists would get together. Now it's just about 1,000 or just over 1,000 seismologists that get together.
That's fascinating. And we are going to get to the quake we had the other day, and I do really appreciate you just taking my my fire hose questions here. But I find this all very, very interesting, and I never really had a chance to talk with an expert like yourself to understand more than we usually do around earthquakes. So we were chatting about the hot spots. Anchorage is one of them. And we were also talking about this data that can come your way that can help you potentially, possibly get a sense of where a big one might happen. With the information that you have, can you predict or sense where and when the next big one will happen for us here in Alaska?
It would be great to be able to predict these things, and we can't even begin to forecast these things. We can with aftershocks, so we can talk about the magnitude 6 a little bit and the aftershock forecast there. But just like forecasting the weather, we can't do a great job. The weather is a little easier because you can see the atmosphere, you can look at it. We can't look deep inside the earth,
right.
So we can't measure some of these things that are factors. So we just don't have a way to predict, but we have some sense of, okay, yeah, but we know that earthquakes are likely within the Anchorage area. We know that there's a chance that they could be extremely damaging to somewhat damaging, but we can't tell you when or where that earthquake might occur. It's one of those things where if we could, we certainly would, but it is a challenging prospect.
So let's talk about what happened on the 27th. We had a 6-point earthquake at 8:11 a.m. I think it was 37 miles from Anchorage.
Yeah.
But how deep did it go? It was pretty deep, wasn't it?
It was deep. It was, if memory serves me, about 40 miles deep.
So why is that significant?
That's significant because that means that earthquake actually occurred in that Pacific plate we were talking about. Being thrust underneath Alaska, it was actually in the Pacific plate.
Okay.
So it was on another tectonic plate.
Wow. Is that you're laughing? Is that kind of blowing your mind? Is that surprising?
Well, so if you think about it, you're standing on the North American plate, and that earthquake occurred in another tectonic plate that was below you. So yeah, it is a little bit hard to wrap your head around that there's so much going on beneath your feet and so deep.
And so the Pacific plate is underneath the North American plate. So for this thing to be 40-something miles down and to have come out of the Pacific plate, that's also affecting, though, that North American plate, right? As it comes up through the Earth, the North American plate is affected as well?
Yeah, so it's being squeezed, and there's pressure being generated. And as all this happens, we're creating the environment for volcanoes. And so that's where Alaska gets all its volcanoes, too, is these interactions between these two plates.
Earlier, before you called in, I was talking about, and I look forward to your answer to this, earthquake preparedness, right? We've seen the movies of kids getting under their desks. Now, I'll never get underneath something. I mean, it just goes against my natural sense of what to do to get underneath something, because wouldn't that be a pretty easy way to be crushed by the thing you're underneath? But what is the modern day relationship to getting underneath a table, a desk, or something that would be available to you?
The mantra is drop, cover, and hold on. And the reason for that is, particularly in earthquake-active areas like Alaska or California, the buildings are generally designed to withstand very significant shaking. So it's not generally building collapse that is the first concern. It's things coming off the wall or ceiling tiles coming down or lights, fixtures or pictures. Yeah, so that sort of stuff is really what you're trying to protect yourself from. And so the reason to get under something is it will help prevent some of that debris from hitting you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, a chandelier or a light fixture is a little different in my mind now than a roof collapsing. So that's good to hear, and it's good to remember that most of our buildings are built to sway, go with the flow of it, and not necessarily collapse upon itself. What about the whole thing of standing in the doorway?
Interestingly enough, research has shown that's a great way to actually get hurt, because if you've been in a large earthquake, it can be really hard to stand.
Okay.
Some people just have, particularly with the motion, even if the shaking isn't that strong, it creates sort of a dizziness, and some people will just fall over. So being in a doorway can be quite challenging because the door is going to be moving and responding to the earthquake waves different than you will.
Okay, so far the table or the desk are staying in the number one slot. And what about just running out of the house or getting in the car?
Cars actually handle the ground motion quite well because they have shock absorbers, and sometimes people can be driving and think and not even notice an earthquake or think they have a flat tire. Running out of a building, again, in very strong shaking, and that would be what you'd do if you knew the building was going to collapse. If that was not a safe building to be in, maybe shouldn't have been in there in the first place. But if you knew the building was going to collapse, that would be the logical response, right? But it can be really hard to move and run and get any distance at all in a very large earthquake before that building started coming down. And that's also the part of the reason why they say drop, cover, and hold on. And it doesn't necessarily have to be under a table. You can put your hands over your head and take a crouching position. But there have actually been times in recovery efforts where people have taken shelter under strong physical objects and been able to be recovered from a building that did collapse or partially collapse. And it's because it just provides a little protection from some of the rubble. But, you know, when buildings collapse, that's when it gets really bad.
Yeah.
And we can see the difference in building codes between some of the recent earthquakes in the Middle East. I'm trying to remember the last one, and I'm drawing a blank, but there was damage from a magnitude 6 earthquake, and people lost their lives.
Yeah, that's pretty strong. Somebody else had said, well, ask them about leaning up against the couch or leaning up against the bed versus getting underneath something. Have you ever heard something about that way to protect yourself?
Oh, absolutely. So, I don't know about you, but there's no way I could get under my bed, and it's not a place I want to be unless I'm doing a deep cleaning. So anything that provides some amount of cover and shelter is what you're really looking for there. And, you know, everybody kind of has to make that risk assessment for themselves.
And are you a proponent of earthquake dress rehearsals, either, you know, at workplaces, at home? How would you suggest we get better prepared?
There's some great resources. You can go to ready.gov. We have some on earthquake.alaska.edu. There are different resources out there on how to prepare. It really comes down to people's comfort levels, but having a communication plan for what to do in a disaster and having a disaster preparedness kit is a helpful thing to have in a place like Alaska where we have the wildfires, we have earthquakes, we have just storms that can be quite significant. So having thought about some of this, what would you do if all the cell phones were dead? Where would your family meet? Go walking through some of those thought processes and putting some things together to be prepared is just good practice.
Yeah. I mean, they talk about the to-go bag, right? And I have a to-go plastic container, but this is interesting that maybe literally going is not always the right move with an earthquake, but certainly having what's in the bag would be helpful should you actually need to get first aid kit, water or whatever else is in there. And so do you yourself have a to-go bag?
I do. And I hate to admit my house is not as well earthquake-proofed. I moved here, I don't have my TV strapped to the wall yet. Things like that. But I do have to-go bags, and they're not perfect. And I think that's a point that I'd like to make is don't let perfect get in the way of having something. So I have a to-go bag sitting in my Arctic entry. It's not perfect. There are big gaps in my family's different preparedness, but we've done some of it.
What are some of the things you have in there?
So I have a camp stove, and a little container of fuel and a little cook kit, clothes, sleeping bag, a little bit of food, doesn't expire, and water. Those are the basics.
Because one of the things I realized the other morning is, okay, so it's happening. I'm jumping out of bed, but I'm realizing, wow, I don't really have, like, my coat wouldn't have been nearby. Now that I know maybe running outside is not the thing to do, I just realized that I really didn't know what to do. I got up, I looked around, I thought, well, I don't have a desk to get under. And I did go to the door, and I did go outside because I just really wasn't clued in. Now I am, and now I'll do, different things for sure. We're talking with Austin Holland, who's been so gracious with his information, his knowledge, his experience, and his time. He is with the Alaska Earthquake Center up at the University of Fairbanks. You do have a fantastic website for people who are into this stuff or just want to get more information, or maybe plan a family night where you're talking more about this so that your kids aren't scared, but they're informed, because I would imagine that's important too, to help kids understand how to move within such a moment. It's just a wonderful website. Well, one more question I have, and then I'll give you a chance to kind of summarize things for us today. Tsunamis. Can you talk a little bit about what they are, how they're caused, and what their relationship is to us here, in Anchorage for sure, but in Alaska as well?
Yeah, so tsunamis are part of the earthquake story here in Alaska, as well as our landslide story. Tsunamis are generated by the water being shifted, the entire column of the seafloor being shifted. And so we talked about the Pacific plate being subducted underneath the North American plate. Well, it kind of bends. If you think of it like a metal rod, that plate's kind of getting the interaction between the two plates, and that friction is kind of bending that rod. And so when an earthquake happens, that tension gets released, and the seafloor pops up and pushes the entire water column above it up, and then it drops back down. This creates tsunami waves that travel, not like what you think of as a ocean wave. You can't see these things. If you're looking out over the ocean, you're not going to see it. It's about 15 minutes or so from crest to crest, and they travel at about the speed of a jet, a passenger airplane.
Really?
So these things are really moving fast, and you can't see them. And so it may be that you get a meter from peak to trough, or maybe 2 meters in the ocean. The problem is that's in the deep ocean over thousands of feet of water. But as you start running that wave up onto land, that 1 or 2 meters can turn into, 60 feet of wave hitting the shore and objects on shore. And so the word actually means harbor wave in Japanese. And so that they're not a danger out in the ocean, they're a danger when you're near shore.
Yeah, which of course we are. I mean, personally, I've always felt more concerned about tsunamis than earthquakes or volcanoes, given how close Anchorage is, actually to the water, and what that could potentially do to a city like ours, since, should all those elements come together in that perfect storm. Does every earthquake create a tsunami, though not all of them obviously severe?
It takes an earthquake offshore, and so on that subduction zone to create an earthquake. And so Kamchatka, you might have heard this summer, generated a tsunami. That was, again, on a subduction zone. So you have to be out in the ocean, number one, and you have to have very large earthquakes to generate a measurable of any, size tsunami. But absolutely, Alaska in the geologic past has had some of the largest tsunamis ever, and we still have, in historical times, have had some of the largest tsunamis. And so the challenge we have in Alaska is we can give tsunami warnings because we can measure the the ocean height at different gauges in the ocean. We can make assessments of how big the tsunami might be based on the earthquake information we record. And so as time goes on, we can do more and more of refining and saying exactly what the impact of a tsunami will be. The challenge is our greatest tsunami hazard is right off the coast along this subduction zone. And so we don't have much time because, remember, these things travel really fast, like the speed of a jet. So it is really hard to create a warning for some of these large tsunamis that Alaska may experience. And so if people feel strong, sustained ground shaking, and they live on the coast, so longer than 10 seconds or so, it's probably time to follow the tsunami evacuation procedures for your community and not wait for that tsunami warning. And the worst that happens is you went a little bit out of your way. That's certainly much better than being washed away in a tsunami wave.
So for us here in Anchorage, would that be the equivalent to driving up to the hillside?
Elevation is key to being out of a tsunami hazard area. A lot of communities have established evacuation zones for the tsunami hazard. I'm certain Anchorage has. I have not looked at it or studied it.
Well, it's just really incredibly helpful information today. You mentioned about aftershocks earlier and what information they can give us. What do they tell us?
Aftershocks follow a fairly predictable pattern. So as we start to have, once we've had an earthquake, we can begin to say, oh, well, we might know something more about the number of felt earthquakes that might occur or the significant earthquakes that might occur over time. And then we can revise that as time goes on and we see how those earthquakes kind of develop a pattern. And so the USGS has an earthquake forecast. If people go to like the magnitude 6 Susitna earthquake on the USGS site, they'll have a earthquake forecast where they can begin to say, well, there's a 20% chance we'll have a magnitude 5 earthquake in the next 2 weeks. That can be incredibly helpful, particularly for the really large earthquakes where a structure may have been damaged. It's good to know, all right, well, we might have an earthquake that could do more damage to this building.
How many hours, days, or weeks would an aftershock be considered an aftershock from an actual earthquake like we had the other day?
Oh, that's a great question. There's no strict answer. We've defined this kind of through seismological terms, but we really don't know the answer until we have the answer. It's when things kind of go back to the way they were before. But as we mentioned, there are 30 to 50,000 earthquakes a year. How do you define before? Before what?
Exactly.
So it's kind of arbitrary, what we call an aftershock, but it's generally for a magnitude 6 to 7 earthquake. It's generally a few years of heightened earthquake activity, further and further apart. But after significant earthquakes, it can be years.
Wow. Because, what I'm thinking is you were talking about that your measurement starts at like 1.5, and this last earthquake was a 6. I mean, it's like at some point, when does an aftershock become an earthquake? You know what I'm saying? It's like in my mind, these aftershocks are smaller, less felt, if felt at all, adjustments that the earth goes through after a big quake. But yet, at some point, if an aftershock is a 4, is that still an aftershock, or are we seeing that as a second earthquake?
So they're all earthquakes, but yes, this is sort of the problem with that. The term aftershock is you can have a magnitude 7 aftershock to a large magnitude 8. It could have a couple magnitude 7 aftershocks. The aftershock designation is really a time indication and kind of a spatial indication that this occurred in the same sort of rupture area of the previous earthquake and occurred after it.
Okay. That makes sense. So it's really an earthquake, even though we get attached to the word aftershock. It's really mini earthquakes after the earthquake still going. Wow. Well, listen, Austin, honestly, this has been a public service that you've given us today. And I super appreciate you being with us for the whole show, because I know for me, I'm leaving our time together far more educated, less ignorant, and, with a greater sense of the need to be prepared. And I think this other component that we don't talk enough about is to have a communication plan should we lose connection the way we're so accustomed to. I know my friend and I, we're like, okay, we're going to meet at this park, which is right between our two neighborhoods, kind of a thing. So it's a good time for everybody to take this information. Like I say, this will become a podcast, and I'll have it on my social media platform. So if you're wanting to listen again or listen with your family, there'll be that opportunity. You could just continue to follow me on Facebook right now for that information. Any final thoughts from you, Austin, before I cut you loose?
No, thank you for talking with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Austin. I super appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Oh, my goodness, how gracious and generous with his time. Austin Holland, who is the Chief Operations Director at the Alaska Earthquake Center. It is my hope that has helped you, that has given you something to work with, and that we will go forward and be more prepared. This is the new design for living here on KONR Radio. We are reimagining how we live, how we love, and how we treat each other. I appreciate you tuning in. As I was saying earlier, you can find the podcasts of this show at podbean.com or on Apple Podcasts. Take good care of yourself. I'll see you next Monday.